My name is Samantha Keene. I'm 44 years old, and the last time my family saw me, they thought I was living in a treatment center in Idaho, broke, ashamed, and barely hanging on. That was the lie they told everyone, because the truth would have broken their empire in half. I was about to walk into the federal courthouse in Charleston, South Carolina, wearing a badge they never believed I could earn, holding evidence that would dismantle 3 generations of power, privilege, and blood money. For 20 years, they thought I was invisible. But I was watching. I always was. Today, the Keene name stops meaning corruption and starts meaning justice. My name is Samantha Keene. I'm 44 years old, and the last time anyone in my family saw me, I was supposedly checking into a rehab facility somewhere outside Boise. I remember the way they patted themselves on the back for being so gracious about my condition. The senator, the pastor, the perfect Southern family. What a story they built around my absence. But while they were telling church circles and political donors I'd fallen off the rails, I was in a DHS safe house in Phoenix, learning how to become someone they'd never suspect, because I hadn't disappeared. I'd gone undercover. The Keene family was old Southern money, baptized in politics, cloaked in charity, and rotten straight through. My father, Senator Daniel Keene, built his entire campaign on family values and American restoration. My brother Elijah ran the biggest evangelical megachurch in the Southeast. And my mother? She smiled politely through it all and made casseroles for the press. But I saw what they did behind those perfect Sunday morning images. When I was 19, I was studying criminal justice at a state college and working part-time at my family's nonprofit, the Keene Foundation for Reconstruction. We were supposedly helping rebuild communities after hurricanes and wildfires, providing jobs, housing, and relief. But the deeper I looked into the paperwork, the less any of it made sense. Contractors with no licenses, labor sites with no safety equipment, paychecks issued under aliases and then voided, and worst of all, death benefit checks that didn't match any official records, not police reports, not coroner's logs, nothing. I asked questions, innocent ones at first, but that's all it took. The night I brought up the missing accident reports to my father, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Samantha, there are some things you're better off not knowing. Focus on your grades." The next day, my scholarship funds vanished, just like that. My brother told the church I was struggling spiritually, and my mother, she just handed me a sleeping pill and said, "Take a few days to rest, sweetheart. You're not yourself lately." They didn't want me asking questions, so I asked someone else. A professor I trusted connected me with a DHS contact. That's how it started. Quiet, careful, no drama. I handed over the files I'd copied on a flash drive. I didn't even know what I was handing them, not really, but it was enough. 2 months later, I got a call. A woman named Agent Torres asked if I'd be willing to disappear, for real this time. It wasn't a choice, it was the only path that made sense. We staged the rehab story. My parents told everyone I'd had a breakdown, that I was unstable and needed to remove myself for healing. They said it with pity and just enough shame to be believable. Meanwhile, I was in a federal program learning how to operate undercover. Surveillance, accounting forensics, trauma response, weapons training, everything. They thought I was gone, but I was watching them more closely than ever. For years, I lived in shadows, different cities, different names. I rebuilt myself from the ground up. I stopped being Samantha Keene, the senator's embarrassment, and I started being the woman who would take down everything that empire stood on. They built their power by exploiting pain, by hiding bodies behind charity, by turning labor into numbers and lives into liabilities. But I had a name too, and I hadn't forgotten it. When people talk about family legacies, they usually mean something noble. Heritage, tradition, values. But in the Keene family, our legacy was carefully constructed. A house built on carefully laid bricks of denial, silence, and beautiful lies. When I was younger, I believed in the image we sold. I believed in the Foundation's mission, in our place in the world. I believed my father when he said we were rebuilding hope. I even believed my brother Elijah when he said, "The Lord has blessed this family with a calling to serve." But lies are strange things. They don't just get built overnight. They require scaffolding, repetition, reinforcement, and most of all, they require someone to carry them forward without asking why. That was never me. By the time I was 20, I'd seen too many red flags to count. The first came when a worker named Daniel Salgado, a quiet man from Guatemala, fell 3 stories from an unsecured scaffold at one of our rebuild sites in Louisiana. I saw his name appear briefly on a timesheet, then vanish. No insurance claim, no funeral through the foundation, just gone. I asked my mother what happened. She blinked once, smiled, and said, "Construction is dangerous work, sweetheart. That's why we pray for safety every morning." But I didn't need prayers, I needed answers. The second red flag came when I was asked to help file expense reports during a spring break visit. I found purchase orders for industrial cement mixers shipped to counties we weren't even operating in. Thousands of dollars in equipment sent to temporary recovery centers that didn't exist. I remember sitting at the desk in my father's office that night, scrolling through invoices and feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I wasn't an accountant, but I wasn't stupid either. I took pictures, I made copies, I told myself I was just trying to understand. But the third flag wasn't a flag, it was a wall. It was the night I brought everything to Elijah. I thought maybe he'd care. He was a preacher after all, the man who cried on stage when talking about the least of these. I laid it all out, the vanished names, the false sites, the ghost invoices. I told him I thought something terrible was happening, and that we could stop it, together. He looked at me for a long time, then poured himself a bourbon and said, "You need to be real careful, Sam. Dad doesn't take kindly to disloyalty, and neither does God." That was it. That was the moment I knew. My family didn't build a charity. They built a machine. A money-laundering, labor-exploiting, death-disguising machine. And I'd been helping maintain it without knowing. So they did what powerful families always do when one part stops working the way they want. They cut me off. My student account was frozen. My apartment lease, co-signed by the foundation, was revoked. Anonymous calls went out to my professors suggesting I was unstable. My email access was revoked. I was locked out of everything. No one said a word to me directly, but the message was loud and clear. "You stop asking questions or we erase you." So I made a decision. I disappeared first. I'd already reached out to Agent Torres by then. I sent her the second batch of files, told her what I'd seen and who I believed was involved. Within weeks, she confirmed what I hadn't wanted to believe. The Keene Foundation was under federal surveillance. The Department of Homeland Security was building a case. They just needed someone inside. Someone with access. Someone the Keenes would never suspect. And thanks to the story they started, I became that someone. They said I went to rehab. My parents crafted it so carefully, the narrative slid into every corner of their circle like gospel truth. "Samantha's in a facility in Idaho," my mother whispered over brunches. "We're praying she finds peace," Elijah said from the pulpit, his voice shaking just enough to seem sincere. No one questioned it, because the alternative, that their golden family was throwing their daughter to the wolves, didn't fit the image. And meanwhile, I was nowhere near Idaho. I was 2,000 miles away in an unmarked training facility in New Mexico, learning how to fire a Glock, how to recognize the sound of a wiretap slipping, how to disappear in plain sight. The kind of place that doesn't show up on maps, with instructors who don't use last names. Where eye contact is optional, but accountability is everything. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't thrilling, it was brutal. 12-hour days, mental deconstruction, identity erasure. They stripped us down to nothing and rebuilt us into tools the government could trust. I didn't sleep through the night for months. I kept hearing my brother's voice. "You need to be real careful, Sam. Dad doesn't take kindly to disloyalty." I wasn't being disloyal. I was doing what no one else in our family ever did, telling the truth. Still, the voice lingered. Even in training, I carried the weight of the lie they'd wrapped me in. Samantha Keene, the unstable, too sensitive daughter, too soft for politics, too naive for business, too emotional for the family name. That's who they told the world I was. And maybe part of me believed it. There were nights I sat on the bunk, sweat still clinging to my back from combat drills, and wondered if they were right. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I should have just looked away like everyone else. But then I'd think about Daniel Salgado, about the anonymous pay stubs, the death benefits paid in cash, the betting pool I'd found in Elijah's office. Yes, a literal spreadsheet ranking workers by risk tier with initials of who bet on what. That's what hardened me. By the time I graduated from training, I wasn't Samantha Keene anymore. I was Agent S.K. Barrett, with credentials, clearance, and a file labeled Eyes Only. My assignment was simple but dangerous. Infiltrate FEMA-connected labor networks in the Gulf and trace the routes that led back to the Keene Foundation. They let me pick my new name, my new state, even my new accent. But one thing stayed the same. I remembered everything. For the next 17 years, I operated under a series of covers. I worked disaster cleanup jobs in Florida and Texas. I posed as a grant writer for a Shell nonprofit in Georgia. I followed trucks, mapped payroll dumps, and fed intel to federal task forces without ever breaking cover. And all the while, my family continued the lie that I was broken, that I was gone. At some point, I stopped trying to correct them, even in my own head. I let the story run wild because every time they told it, I became more invisible to them and more valuable to the truth. Then came the call from Agent Torres. She told me what I'd been waiting 17 years to hear. The threads lead back to Charleston. Your family, your brother, your father. We've got enough to move, but we need you back inside. Back inside. Back to dinners and board meetings and Southern charm. Back to the people who had turned my silence into their safety net. Back to being Samantha Keene, only this time, with a wire under my blouse and a federal badge tucked inside my purse. The rehab story had done its job. They forgot me. But I never forgot them. I walked up the courthouse steps wearing the most powerful disguise I'd ever worn, my real name, Samantha Keene. For 20 years, they buried me under a false story. And now, they were about to hear the truth in a voice they hadn't heard since the day they erased me. But this time, I wasn't asking for a place at their table. I was taking the whole damn table down. The federal courthouse in Charleston was packed. Agents, attorneys, media, victims' families. And in the far back row, my family. My father, Senator Daniel Keene. My brother, Pastor Elijah Keene. My mother, in her perfect silk blouse and pearls, her expression unreadable, as if trying to decide which emotion would play best on camera. None of them recognized me. Not the woman with squared shoulders and a federal badge clipped to her waist. Not the face that had aged with intention. Not weariness, but fire. When the prosecutor stood and said, "The government calls Agent Samantha Keene to the stand," the oxygen left the room. I heard the quiet gasp, my mother probably. I saw Elijah freeze, lips parting just slightly. My father didn't move, but I saw his fingers twitch against the armrest. The bailiff swore me in. I sat down, heart steady, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I'd already lived through the worst part, being forgotten. "Agent Keene," the prosecutor began, "please state your current position and tenure with the agency." "I am a field investigator with the Department of Homeland Security. I have served in various undercover capacities for over 17 years. My current clearance is classified Level 4. The courtroom was still, the press pool was scribbling, and my family? They were unraveling in real time. "And what is your relationship to the defendants?" "Daniel Keene is my father. Elijah Keene is my brother. I was born into the Keene family, but I severed personal contact in 2005 due to ethical concerns regarding the Keene Foundation." The prosecutor nodded. "Tell the court how this investigation began." So I did. I told them about the ghost job sites, the falsified worker files, the human trafficking hidden behind disaster relief, the millions laundered through subcontractors, funneled into PACs and offshore accounts. And I told them how the Keene Foundation wasn't just negligent, it was criminal. I testified for 3 hours. I read from emails and showed time-stamped surveillance photos. I played a recording of Elijah joking about overstocked laborers during a hurricane season. And then I gave them the spreadsheet, the one he'd labeled liability pool. It listed dozens of undocumented workers who had suffered non-reportable incidents. Some names had red asterisks next to them. Dead, injured, missing. It was the only time my voice broke. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for almost a full minute. Then the defense attorney stood up, young, smooth, expensive, and asked the question I'd been expecting. "Agent Keene, would you describe your relationship with your family as emotionally strained?" I held his gaze. "I would describe it as terminated." He smiled like he thought he had me. "So it's fair to say this entire investigation may be motivated by revenge?" I leaned in just slightly. "Sir, revenge would have been easier. It wouldn't have taken 17 years or involved protecting dozens of vulnerable families from the people sitting in this courtroom. Revenge is fast. This was justice." He had nothing after that. No more questions. When I stepped off the witness stand, I didn't look at my family. They weren't mine anymore. They were waiting for me in the hallway. My mother got there first, stepping between reporters like she was still walking through garden parties, like nothing in that courtroom could possibly apply to her. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling, mascara smudged beneath one eye like a woman surprised to find herself exposed. "Samantha," she started, her voice catching, breaking on the name. "You told the world I was mentally unstable," I said, my tone low, even. "You let them believe I was some tragic cautionary tale, for 20 years. Her lip quivered. We were told you'd gone off the deep end." "No," I cut in, "you decided that because it was easier than facing what I saw, what I knew." She reached out like she wanted to touch me, maybe the way she used to when I was little and scared of thunder. But I didn't move closer. I didn't step back either. I just let the silence settle between us like a weight. Then Elijah appeared, flanked by 2 aides who clearly weren't sure whether to flee or pray. He looked like a ghost of himself, sweaty, shaking, half the sermon in his eyes but none of the spirit. You didn't have to do this, he said, jaw clenched. You could have come to us, handled this in the family. The family, I repeated, letting the words taste like ash in my mouth. You mean the one that erased me, lied about me, made me disappear so you could keep profiting off other people's pain? You betrayed us, he snapped. You humiliated us. I let the words hang for a moment before I answered. No, I said softly, I exposed you. There's a difference. Then came my father. Senator Daniel Keene didn't speak at first. He just stared at me like I was a ghost he didn't believe in. He was thinner than I remembered, but no less imposing. His power had always come from stillness, from the way he could make an entire room freeze with just a raised eyebrow. You destroyed our name, he finally said, his voice as cold and polished as the marble beneath our feet. After everything we gave you. You gave me silence, I replied. You gave me shame. You handed me a script and told me to play the broken daughter so your hands stayed clean. You think that's a gift? He looked at me for a long time, then with a sneer he spat out, We took care of you. No, I said, you buried me, but I grew anyway. They didn't know what to do with that. None of them did. Because I wasn't the ghost they'd invented. I was flesh and blood. I was federal clearance and testimony and truth. I was the consequence they never expected. Reporters were closing in, camera flashes pulsing. My badge glinted on my hip. I could see the headlines already forming. Keene family whistleblower, daughter turns federal witness. But to me, it was simpler than that. I looked at all three of them, my mother with her pearl-studded guilt, Elijah with his hollow scripture, and my father with his granite pride, and I said, I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm not your cover story. I'm not your shame. I walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because after the oath I took in that courtroom, there was nothing left to say. 1 year later, and I still haven't been back to Charleston. Not even once. The trial made national headlines. Southern Dynasty falls in federal racketeering sting. The Keene name, once synonymous with church, charity, and clean politics, was now tied to labor exploitation, fraud, and human trafficking. Senator Daniel Keene is serving 35 years in federal prison. My brother Elijah took a plea deal, 15 years and the permanent loss of his ministry. My mother, while never officially charged, became a ghost of the social circles she once ruled. The Keene Foundation was liquidated. Every cent went toward restitution. The homes, the land, even the stained glass chapel Elijah built in his own image. It's gone. And me? I live in a cottage on the Carolina coast, small, quiet, paid for with clean money earned through hard work and government service. I walk on the beach most mornings, drink coffee from a chipped mug, and meet weekly with the only therapist who ever told me the truth. You were never too soft. You were always too strong. I consult now, quietly. No cameras, no press. I help build oversight systems for disaster relief programs across the country. Systems that make sure no family ever has the power to do what mine did, turn tragedy into profit. I still get letters. Some are from the families I helped, grateful, raw, handwritten notes. A single mom from Baton Rouge sent me a photo of her son holding his school award. A man from Honduras sent me a message in Spanish that simply read, Gracias por vernos. Thank you for seeing us. Others are from prison. Elijah's letters are sermons without meaning. My mother's are drenched in guilt, asking about holidays, recipes, grandchildren I never had. And my father, his letters are full of rage. He doesn't write to reconnect. He writes to blame. I've never responded. Because forgiveness for me isn't about words. It's about boundaries. It's about truth. And the truth is this. Some betrayals don't need closure. They need distance. There's a lot I lost in those 20 years. Birthdays, relationships, a chance to be young without carrying the weight of a secret identity. I'll never get that time back. But I gained something more. I gained peace. I gained a life that's mine, not scripted, not staged, not sold as a political talking point. And every time I think of the girl I used to be, the one they buried under whispers and shame, I think of what she became. Not their failure, not their scapegoat, but the storm they never saw coming. Sometimes I sit on the porch at night, listening to the waves crash, and I whisper her name. Samantha Keene. I say it like a promise. Because the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It wasn't in the headlines. It wasn't even in the prison sentences. The real victory was reclaiming the name they tried to poison, and making it mean something better. Not Keene the dynasty, but Keene the woman, the one who chose truth, the one who chose justice, the one who walked away and never looked back. Sometimes the people who call you too soft are just afraid of the kind of strength they can't control. And sometimes walking away from your family isn't abandonment, it's protection, for yourself, for others, for the truth. You don't owe your silence to people who build their power on lies. You owe your voice to the people who need it most. So if you've ever been underestimated, misjudged, cast aside for choosing integrity over approval, this story is your reminder. You are not weak for feeling, you are not wrong for walking, you are not alone for standing up. Because in the end, strength isn't how loud you fight. It's how deeply you refuse to become what broke you. Here on Sweet Revenge, Happy Ending, we believe that justice doesn't always come easy, but when it does, it's worth every quiet, defiant step you take. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your story matters, your strength counts, and the ending, that's yours to reclaim.